Good morning to everybody. We'd like to thank Shandaya Safan for sponsoring this recording. It's to commemorate the Yortzeit of Shaya's, Dr. Shaya's father, Getzel David ben Aaron Shlomo, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and may his neshama have an Aliyah B'Gan Eden, amongst other things, in the zchut of the Divrei Torah that are now being said. The mitzvah in Parshat Emor is one of the great mitzvot, if one has got the audacity to say such a thing, in that to start saying that differentiating between mitzvot, be'emet, one of the supreme mitzvot mentioned in Parshat Emor is a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, of sanctifying and hallowing Hashem's name. Usually we understand that the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem is the main aspect of Kiddush Hashem is the preparation or the willing of a person, willingness of a person to martyr himself if it conflicts with Chalila, with rejecting Hashem. So we also know that actually the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem is not only to die on Kiddush Hashem for Kiddush Hashem, but like the Gemara in Masechet Sotah says concerning Yosef, that it's to live in through a way of Kiddush Hashem. The Gemara over there, Masechet Sotah, says that Yosef was sanctified God's name in private, and that's why he brought about the Kiddush Hashem. The Gemara explains that's why an extra hey was added to his name. We say in Tehillim, Dut Yehosef, sometimes he's called Yehosef. Yud and Hey is the Shem of Hashem because he sanctified Hashem's name in private. And the Rambam and the laws of Kiddush Hashem speaks about Yosef, that he resisted the temptations of Potiphar's wife for no other reason. I mean, he was in private. He was a young boy, 17 years old, far from home. No one would have known about it. But what he did was he rejected her seduction just because, and solely because it went against Hashem's will. And that living by and resistance, living according to the mitzvot of Hashem, there it was in private. It's called Kiddush Hashem in private. To get back to the point, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem is not only when a person dies on Kiddush Hashem, but he also lives on Kiddush Hashem by giving up all that he has for the sake of Hashem to fulfill his will. But having now said all that, what I wanted to basically share with you is one or two insights, and that's regarding the wordings in the pasuk of Kiddush Hashem. There's a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. We would have expected, therefore, that the wording in the verse would be like this: V'kidashtem et Hashem Lokechem, and you should sanctify Hashem's name. But that's not what the pasuk says. The wording of the pasuk is V'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, and I will be sanctified amongst or in the midst of the children of Israel. So look at the difference. Instead of saying the word you shall sanctify, it says I will be sanctified. It's almost as if there's no mitzvah at all, when the wording and I will be sanctified is almost describing a situation. It's not the language of a command. It's the passive, and I will be sanctified can be read even as a promise. There will be a time that I will be sanctified. But where's the language of command in the pasuk where it says, you should sanctify my name? From here, it seems to be that this also is, besides other proofs, a reflection of what the Rambam says, that if a person didn't give up his life when he should have, and he didn't fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, nevertheless, the Beit Din does not exact punishment on such a person, because in the end, bottom line, what he did was he was under threat, he was under coercion. Instead of giving up his life, he decided to live. Okay, but everything that happened, the scenario was one of coercion. And the Rambam says this golden rule that the Beit Din never ever punishes a person for something that he did under duress, under coercion. So that's why he was mevatel a mitzvah. That's why he did something which he shouldn't have done, but we don't punish him. And that is all encapsulated in the words Venigdashti. Venigdashti is that Hashem is saying that I want you to almost volunteer. I'm not commanding it outright. I'm just saying Venigdashti, and I'm expecting you that's what you should do, because it's the circumstances are one of duress, and therefore the Torah couches it in such a way that I will be sanctified. In other words, I am relying, as it's if Hashem saying, I'm relying on you to voluntarily give up your life for my sake. And that's why it's written in the passive way. And that's also why, because the circumstances of Kiddush Hashem are always one of coercion, when someone's threatening a Jew, so then that's why it is, we don't say it outright, do it, but we want the person to rise to the occasion and voluntarily give up his life for the sake of Hashem. And that then it's really bemet, a true Kiddush Hashem, when a person then responds to this calling. There's a second very, very great Kiddush in the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. It's something which, in a way, is, the Mishnah, the Torah says, V'nikdashti betoch b'nei Yisrael, and I will be sanctified in the midst of the Jewish people. Now, when we use the word midst, it implies, it's got a connotation that there's a whole group of people, and then when the one person rises and he gives up his life, so then that's when Kiddush Hashem applies. But if it's, let's say, like in the example that we brought beforehand of Yosef, then that is a case of Kiddush Hashem, but you can't say that the setting was in the midst of something. There was only him and Potiphar's wife. So you can't use the word that Yosef was sanctified, Hashem's name, in the midst of the Egyptian population. No, it was only him and her. So what is the word in the midst? Betoch, the Gemara says, learns from Gzeira Shava, that the midst means there has to be at least 10 Jews in order for the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem to apply to its full and proper extent. And then we've got I think that beyond what is actually, there's another layer of what it's trying to say. It could be, this is the very thing, that message that Torah is trying to say, is that the real mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, in other words, when I say real, it means in its like perfect manner, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem happens only when there is a community. Or another way to say it, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem is when the Jewish people, as a people, or Medinat Yisrael, which represents the Jewish people, the Malchut of Hashem, or where there's a minyan, which is the minimum which results in a representation of the Jewish people, that's when Kiddush Hashem really and truly applies. Then when the Jewish people now, like through the army and through the wars and through certain moral messages of Medinat Yisrael, that's when there is a real true Kiddush Hashem, because that's when it really makes an impact on the world at large, right? So when an individual does Kiddush Hashem, nachon, it's a Kiddush Hashem. But when it's done by the state, or when it's done by the government or the king, the Melech HaMashiach, when he'll rule, then that public, as the Gemara learns, in the midst of Toch Koch, when there's at least 10 people, that is the real manifestation of Kiddush Hashem, as opposed to Kiddush Hashem by an individual. What I'd like to, I'm ending off over here, what I'd like to speak about Bli Neder, I'm not on Shabbat, is that there's a paradox over here. The paradox is that when and I will be sanctified in the midst of the Jewish people. So who's the audience? Is the audience the Jewish people or the audience the Goyim? That's what I'd like to speak about on Shabbat. But suffice it to say that we made a couple of points over here on the great mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. Number one, that Kiddush Hashem applies when in martyrdom, and Kiddush Hashem, like Yosef, applies when a person, even an individual, when he's living and not dying, but he is giving up everything of his being to fulfill the mitzvah of Hashem, and even if it's a private, and as the Rambam says, he did it for no other reason because this is what Hashem commanded. That's the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. We then, point number two, that the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem applies when V'nigdashti, Hashem's wanting that the Kiddush Hashem, that there should be a voluntary almost like expression, and that's why it doesn't say a full-on command, you should be Kiddush Hashem, saying, and I will be sanctified because you will rise up to the occasion to give up your lives of Kiddush Hashem. And the third point that we made was that the real Kiddush Hashem is not only when individual makes Kiddush Hashem, but the Kiddush Hashem, which is the perfect and the apex of Kiddush Hashem, is when the community, as a community, when Am Yisrael, they sing the song of Hashem by saying that Hashem is supreme. That's why it says, V'nigdashti b'toch, and toch means in the midst, that there's to be at least a minyan. Shabbat shalom lekulam.